Hello friends, welcome to the video series on interview question for SQL PL SQL developers. We are seeing about the cursor related interview question. In the previous set of videos we have actually seen about what is a cursor and what are the different types of cursor, and we have seen in detail about explicit cursor and implicit cursor and the cursor attributes and parameterized cursor and for cursor. As a continuation of that, in this video we'll see about what is a ref cursor. Okay, so before starting with that, so here is a broad classification of cursor like implicit cursor and explicit cursor. In fact, we have seen in detail about named cursor, parameterized cursor and for cursor. So in this video, we'll just concentrate more on ref cursor and its type like strongly typed ref cursor and weakly typed ref cursor. So before starting with the actual ref cursor related examples, let us first go through the implicit cursor so that our understanding with respect to the ref cursor will be better. So here is a named explicit cursor. So what I'm doing here is that I've just opened a cursor called employee name list for a select statement called select ename from employee. So obviously when we open this particular cursor, we'll be able to get the list of employee names from employee table. So we'll be just looping through the cursor and we'll be fetching one by one name, and once the cursor reaches the end of record, will be exiting out of the cursor. In fact, this is what we have seen in detail in the previous sets of videos. First, let me just execute this query, then we'll go for the next example. So here is the same example. So let me just first execute and show you the result. So as expected, this example is just going to list the names from the employee table. Fine. Let us just go through our next example. See, in the previous example, actually, we are getting a list of names from employee table. Suppose if we want to get the list of names who is working in a department 10, and in some other place we want to access the list of name in department 20. So typically we will define two cursors, one cursor for department 10 and another cursor for department 20. So obviously we can just open the first cursor and we can just loop through that and we can access the list of employees who is working in department 10. Same way we can just open the second cursor and we can just loop through that to get the list of employees who is working in department 20. First let me just execute it, then we'll just go for the next example. So here is the example. So let me just execute it. So as expected, if you can see here, the first cursor is listing the employees working in department 10. Same way the second cursor is just listing the employees who is working in the department 20. Okay, now here if you see, in fact both the queries are exactly the same except the where condition. So instead of having two cursors, in fact we can make it as a single cursor called parameterized cursor. So using a single parameterized cursor, we can in fact achieve the same functionality. In fact, this is what we have seen in the parameterized cursor video. The one key thing is that while opening the cursor, we need to mention the parameter name. Same way while opening the same cursor, here we are passing the parameter 20. So let me just execute it, then we'll start with our ref cursor example. So here is the same example. So let me just execute it. As expected, it's just listing the employees who is working in department 10, as well as the list. The second cursor is listing the employees working in department 20. Let us go through our fourth example. Fine. See, in all the three previous examples, if you see, the named cursor is associated with the query, and if there is a similar query except there is a difference in the where condition, we can combine it as a single cursor, so that it's not necessary that we have to write two different cursors or something. But suppose if we want two different informations, for example, in some places we want informations from employee table, in some other places we want the name of the department from some other table. In that case, we will not be able to combine these things into a single query. So obviously we need to have two different cursor, one to get the list of employee name, another to get the list of department name. So I'm just opening the first cursor to access the list of employee name, and the second cursor I'm just opening to list the department names from the department table. Okay, let me just execute and show. From next example, we'll start with our ref cursor and why we are going with the ref cursor. So here is the example. So we are just opening the first cursor to print the list of name. Same way, if you see, the second cursor is printing the list of department. Perfect. Now we'll see see, when there is two different queries, obviously we will not be able to combine, or we will not make it as a single cursor to open these two different queries. That is the reason in explicit named cursor we are using two different cursors for two different queries. Whereas in case of ref cursor, the main advantage is we can use a single cursor to open completely different sets of queries. In fact, this is the key learning here. Ref cursor will allow us to open different sets of query, whereas the explicit cursor will not allow us to open a query other than the one which is associated to that cursor pointer or cursor name. Okay, now we will see how to define our ref cursor. The first thing is that ref cursor is a data type. So we need to create a type of that ref cursor type. You can see here I'm doing a type definition. So this type definition is very similar to the type definition what we are doing in a collections. For example, whenever you want to use a V array or a nested table or associative array, so before accessing that, before using that, you typically will be defining a type of that array type. So first is a type definition. The next line is a variable of the type definition. So this is nothing but the type what we defined here. So now this is our cursor pointer. Okay, so this is the cursor name. Okay, now that we have, so the key difference from a ref cursor to the explicit named cursor is, in case of explicit named cursor, while defining the explicit cursor itself, we would be associating the query to the explicit cursor, whereas in case of ref cursor, while opening that ref cursor, we will be associating the query. So here is the example how to associate a query. So while as part of open keyword, we will typically associate a query. So now I am associating select ename from employee for this cursor. So at the time of execution, when this particular line get executed, whatever the select statement you are associating with that particular cursor will get executed, and that information will be stored in the memory, and the rest of the process is very similar to the explicit cursor. After opening, you just need to loop through to get the information or fetch information from the memory one by one. Once it reaches the end of record, you can check whether it is reached or not. Then if it is reached, you can exit out of that. So the rest of the process, like looping through, fetching and checking whether it is not found using its attribute and closing, all these things are very similar to the explicit named cursor. The only difference and the key difference is at the time of opening, we are associating the query. So this is the key difference. Okay, the advantage is that once the query is once the cursor is open for one particular query, once it is completed, in fact we can open for some other query also. Here if you see, I'm opening the same cursor with different query. The first query I have opened for employee name from employee table. The second query I have opened for department name and department number from department query. You can see the query here. Okay, so this is the advantage using a single ref cursor. Now we are opening two completely different SQLs. It's not a similar SQL, two completely different SQLs. In case if it is a quite similar SQL, only with a difference in the where condition, we can handle with the parameterized cursor itself. Whereas a completely different SQLs we can associate. So the key I just want to re-emphasize this particular sentence. The key difference and the key importance of ref cursor is that it's dynamicity, right? We'll be able to dynamically assign a different and completely different set of SQLs at the runtime. So first let me execute and show you the result. Then we'll learn few more concepts about ref cursor. So the same example I'm just executing. As expected, the first cursor or the first query associated to that cursor will fetch the list of employee name. The second query associated to the same cursor will fetch us the department number and the department name. Fine. Now let us quickly see the way it differs a bit from the explicit cursor. As you can see here, in case of explicit named cursor, we will be associating the query. So this is a static query and we'll be associating at the declaration part itself. Whereas in case of ref cursor, the query we will be assigning while opening the ref cursor. So that is why it makes it very easy for us to assign different queries at the runtime. Whereas in case of explicit cursor, we will not be able to open the same cursor pointer to a completely different SQL. So this is the key difference. In fact, I'll just summarize and tell you what key points you need to answer from interview aspect at the end of the slide. But before that, let us understand all the informations related to the ref cursor so that it is easy for us to just point out and answer it in the interview. Fine. Let us see one more example. So this example is again the same ref cursor. The only difference is in the first place I've just assigned the static SQL, a simple SQL which is associated to the ref cursor. The same ref cursor now I'm assigning a dynamic SQL. So the key advantage of ref cursor is that you can dynamically frame your SQL statement as a string and you can associate it to the ref cursor also. So that is why this is more flexible compared to the explicit cursor. Let me just execute this, then we'll learn few more concepts about ref cursor. Yeah, here is the same example. So I'm just executing here. As you can see here, the SQL statement associated to the ref cursor is fetching the employee name, and the dynamic query or the string which contains a valid select statement which is going to get the information from department table, that is our department number and department name. Fine. Now let us learn one more very important concept. See, it's not necessary that we need to use only the scalar variable. In fact, we can use the row type variables as well. So this is just to show you that in this example, I'm selecting all the information from the employee. In this case, I'm selecting all the information from department. So that is why if you see, I'm fetching the information into a variable of employee row type. So same way, similarly in this case, that is in the second cursor, I'm fetching the information into a variable which is of department row type variable. Let me just execute and show you the result. So here is the here is the result. The first cursor or the first query associated to the ref cursor is fetching us the employee information. The second query associated to the ref cursor is fetching the department related informations. Fine. Now let us understand what is a strongly typed and what is a weakly typed ref cursor. Okay. The key thing is that as part of ref cursor, you can specify a optional class called return followed by what data type this particular cursor has to return. So when you explicitly specify the return keyword, that means this particular cursor or any query associated to this cursor should return only of employee percentage row type data only. That means here we are binding this cursor to a return data type. That means anything other than this data type, the cursor is not supposed to return. In case if it's trying to associate, if you're trying to associate any other query which is going to return any other different data type, you will get a runtime error. So that is why in this case, I'm just fetching select star from employee only. In case if we try to assign any other SQL, this will return an error. So let us see this example. So here is the strongly typed ref cursor. I just mentioned the return employee percentage row type. That means the query what we are assigning to this ref cursor should return of a data type of employee percentage row type only. So let me just execute it. So as expected, this will get executed because it's as expected, it is returning the list of employees from the employee table. In fact, we just put select star from employee. Suppose if we just change it to department, okay. So since it is department, I'm just using the into this variable. So let me just make it as department name. Let me remove the rest of the information from here. Okay. Now if I try to execute this, you will get an error. As expected, we are getting an error. Right. Now if you see, it is saying wrong number of values into fetch statement. That is because the expectation is that this ref cursor has to return only of data type employee percentage row type. Let me just change this information. Instead of department, let me make it employee. So obviously it is an employee, so I'm just making it as this employee row ename. Okay, now let us execute it. Now if you see, it just got executed because we got the expected data type. Okay, now let me just revert everything. Department. Okay, so as expected we will get an error because it's returning a different data type. So let us comment out our return keyword. Okay, now this becomes a weakly typed ref cursor. If you specify a return keyword, it is a strongly typed ref cursor. If you are not specifying, it is a weakly typed ref cursor. Now that I have commented the return keyword and the data type, and we are fetching from the department table, let me execute the same block. As expected, now it is returning the list of department name. The moment you include the return keyword, it will fail because the cursor has to return employee row type only. So in case of weakly typed, we can able to associate different types of SQL to the same cursor, whereas in case of strongly typed, we will be able to assign only the query which can return the data type specified. So the key difference is the return. If you specify the return keyword, that is a strongly typed. If you omit the return keyword, that is a weakly typed. Okay, so this is about strongly typed ref cursor and weakly typed ref cursor. Okay, in fact there are two different ways by which you can define a ref cursor. One is using the type definition. So this is what we have seen. So this type definition way is what I've just shown you till now through different examples. There is in fact another way to define a ref cursor. You don't have to define this type definition. Instead, you can simply say sys underscore ref cursor. So the sys underscore ref cursor is nothing but Oracle has already predefined the type for us. So we can simply use that predefined type. So the rest of the functionalities are very similar. So either you can define the type and you can create a cursor variable of your defined ref cursor type. Otherwise, you can just go ahead and use the sys underscore ref cursor. Let me just execute and show you. But key difference is sys ref cursor is always a weakly typed ref cursor. Okay, so that is the difference. There is no strongly typed ref cursor in case of when you define using the sys ref cursor. Let me just execute and show you the result. So here is the same cursor we just defined using sys underscore ref cursor. So let me just execute it again. So I've just associated the query, select star from employee. Okay, so we are just printing the employee name and the job information. So as expected, it is just printing the employee name and the job. Okay, so the one more very important advantage of ref cursor is, since it is a defined data type, we can use the ref cursor to return out of the function. So here is this function where I am saying the return type of the function is sys ref cursor. That means this function can return a ref cursor which can be used in the other APIs. So we are just opening the ref cursor here and we are just returning so that the caller will open, fetch the information and loop through the result. Let me just execute and show you this. So here is the function. So I've just created the function. So let us just call this function. So to call, as you can see here, I'm just calling this function. This will return a ref cursor. So we need a variable of a sys ref cursor. So I've just defined a ref cursor variable. I'm just calling the function here. Since it's already opened in the function, we are just looping through and fetching the information. So let me just execute this block. As expected, it is just fetching the information, or it's fetching the cursor which is received from a function. So that is another advantage. See, the main advantage here is that there are two different ways by which typically will return the information to the client programs. One is using a collection which returns like huge amount of information to the client. The another way is using the ref cursor. So this is one more advantage of ref cursor compared to explicit cursor. Okay. So we've just seen a lot of example about like explicit cursor, parameterized cursor. Then we just start understanding a ref cursor and a strongly typed ref cursor and weakly typed ref cursor. But from interview point, obviously you will not be able to talk about all these things, but you just need to summarize and say the key point so that interviewer will know that you are actually working or you have worked in the ref cursor. So here is the list of key points you should keep it in mind from an interview aspect. The first point is that ref cursor is a data type. Okay, then the variable that is created on based of ref cursor type is called the cursor variable. The main advantage of ref cursor variable is that it can be used to open different types of SQL statements. And one more main advantage is that it can be used to open a dynamically framed SQL statement. One more thing is that ref cursor is, these three are the key points from interview perspective. Ref cursor is very dynamic compared to the explicit named cursor because at runtime you can open either any different type of SQL or a dynamically framed SQL. Another advantage is that, in fact, this is also very important point from interview aspect. Ref cursors are very useful because it is used to return the information from one PL SQL component to other PL SQL component, and in fact we'll be using this ref cursor to return huge amount of information to the client programs as well. Finally, obviously, like ref cursor can be used to return information to the client API. So these are the key points from the interview aspect. Just keep it in mind. Just practice few examples so that you'll be able to answer much better. If you have learned some, okay. The rest of the cursor related questions I'll talk about in the upcoming videos. If you have learned something new, please like this video, subscribe and stay tuned for new feature videos, interview question, SQL practical question and concept video. If you want any questions to be answered, you can post it in the comment section or you can drop to this mail ID. Thanks a lot for watching this video.